Hello everybody and welcome to That's Football. I can't speak. I cannot believe what Jamie Carragher has said. Total contradiction to every other British pundit in the game. You know, this is fantastic. I've got to say, so many times we call them out as not really having a pulse when it comes to understanding the modern game. But this is what Jamie Carragher tweeted last night. Anthony of Manchester United has done more in 6 months than Jadon Sancho has done in 2 years. Yet Anthony gets plenty of criticism and Sancho gets very little. Well, top answer in the reply actually was me. I'm not blowing smoke up my own arse, but I just replied, and a lot of people obviously agreed. I just replied with, British passport, Jamie, because you know what? There's a bigger question here, and it probably happens at every single club. I was watching Man United last night, absolute shambles, but the contrast in so-called experts in the media, ex-players or whatever, and their perception of that game when compared to performances from Jadon Sancho and Harry Maguire and David De Gea's disaster class, well, it's all about De Gea. And we see this all the time. When Man United lost to Liverpool, it was all on Bruno. And, we see it all the time. And we've seen it with Anthony as well. I've seen Anthony called all sorts of things over the season by various ex-players on various mainstream media outlets. I've seen journalists who give player ratings and you look at Anthony's and you go, they clearly just do not like him. And, there's a common theme there. And Jamie Carragher called it out last night. Why does Anthony get more criticism than Jadon Sancho's had? And Jadon Sancho's been there for 2 years and Anthony's hardly been there. It's the British passport thing. So I think it's amazing that Jamie Carragher has actually said that. And some would say there's a contradiction from him there because let's not forget at the start of the season, he was calling out that Lisandro Martinez wouldn't be good enough. You've got Graham Souness sat next to him going, Casemiro's a steady Eddie. I mean, that for me again, it's the British passport thing, isn't it? And what is the British passport thing? Well, ultimately, a lot of the people who have these opinions have a British passport as ex-players, and they know a lot of the players who have a British passport. So there's mates rates there, but also it's the fact that we overhype British players, and we always have done. And I'm a big fan of people like Jack Grealish. I think he's a ridiculously talented player. Harry Kane's a top player. Jude Bellingham's a top player. I really like Rashford and Shaw and Saka, and we have got some really good British players. But do we overhype them to levels that they're not at yet? And also, the problem is, the more average players, we are terrible at overhyping them. And then we also almost become intimidated. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about a player like Anthony specifically, that he comes into the Premier League and, he does his little spin. And it's almost like, who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing coming to the Premier League and doing that sort of thing? It's like, I don't know whether it's a fear or an ignorance, but there's certainly a disdain towards it. And, I, as a young person, loved after I loved the 94 World Cup in America. We weren't in it, England, but I loved it. I always think how good it would have been if England had been in it. But the legacy of that World Cup is that we saw people like Spurs bringing in players like Klinsmann and Popescu. And I think Sheffield Wednesday, what was the name of the lad they got? Was it Dimitrescu or someone like that? And that was the start. And then you got people like Zola going to Chelsea. And I was at school in those days and I was like, this was amazing. Used to buy Match and Shoot, and I just absolutely loved it. And I think people of my generation just do not understand it, and younger, we do not understand this bitterness towards non-British players. As I said, look at the pile-on on De Gea last night. Look at the pile-on onto Anthony. Look at the pile-on to Bruno. And look, I'm no Arsenal fan, Chelsea fan, Liverpool fan, so I don't know how it works. But ultimately, I think at Liverpool, we've got one of the best players in the world in Mo Salah. All right, he might not be there now, but certainly over the last 5 years, he's been one of the best players in the world. I rarely hear Mo Salah being held up as better than Neymar or better than Mbappe or better than Lewandowski, and yet he has become one of the world's best players within the Premier League. It's the same with Kevin De Bruyne as well. Now, they win awards because I think they're respected by their peers, but I think the way the press portrays them, it's almost like they're suppressed. What do you want to do? Do you want to talk about how good Mason Mount is, or do you want to talk about how good Salah is? And I think we fail. I think we're failing as a Premier League, and I think we're failing as a mainstream, and I think we're failing in the world of journalism because we're not actually embracing these players. They play for Liverpool, they play for Manchester United, they play in the English Premier League, this league, the greatest league in the world, and they're a part of it. And look, I don't think international football, from an English point of view, is very successful. I mean, slow sports news. We haven't won anything since 1966, and yet we're obsessed with championing the British passport players. And actually, I think that's why I mention it. And last Friday we were talking about the linesmen. I quite like to get into these bigger debates about football every now and again, because I think you're more than capable of it, and I think you're interested in it, and I think you can have an opinion on it. But you know what? I don't know whether Jamie Carragher had a few last night, or whether he's doing it as a wind-up, or whether he genuinely meant it, because I think he's part of the establishment that actually is a problem. What he said about Martinez was bang out of order. It was ignorance. You can't just say, oh, they're not big enough to play in this league, and when you've never bloody watched them. But I think he's absolutely spot on, and we've been saying this for a while. There's definitely a dislike for Anthony, and yet there are players that haven't performed who have a British passport. And I've been shouting this out at Manchester United for a long time. Mates rates in the media, you see it on Sky all the time. Would Carragher have a pop at Gerrard when he was crap at Villa? Probably not. Neville wouldn't do it about Solskjaer, and openly, and to be fair, said, I'm not going to call him out, even though I've called out Mourinho and everyone else because he's a mate. It's not acceptable, and I think it dilutes and it influences. And look, I got very angry after the Liverpool game because Man United was terrible, absolute rubbish. Liverpool deserved to batter us. They could have scored 10 that day. But to individualise it on Bruno and start saying, he's a shambles, he's petulant, and obviously there was the lie that he wanted to come off, which never helped him. And then the next day in the United fan base, it's all about Bruno, and actually you want it to be about the collective. Everybody was crap that day. Rashford was crap that day, but obviously, let's go in on Bruno because he's a foreign player, and there seems to be this issue around that, and it's not right. And I do really, and have been quite passionate about it for a long time, and I do sort of delve into it and think, well, why is it? And I think, look, for me, I couldn't believe it when you had Jurgen Klinsmann and Vialli and Zola and even Hullet coming into the Premier League in those 90s days. And then obviously, look, we've always had foreign players. Manchester United, Cantona was obviously there before the 94 World Cup. Kanchelskis. We've always had that. But the explosion of foreign talent, and yeah, it did go the other way. And I just wonder if there's a bit of resentment in some of these ex-players, because maybe when they were playing, they just saw this influx of foreign players, and actually we were getting to the point where Wenger was picking a completely foreign 11, wasn't he? We've balanced that out. I think the Premier League has got that perfect synergy now, where you've got a lot of English players playing in the Premier League, a lot of British players playing in the Premier League, a lot of Irish players playing in the Premier League, and then you've got and traditionally that's what the Division 1, that's why I mention Ireland and the British players, because that's what Division 1 before the Premier League was, predominantly Irish and British players. And there are a lot of those coming in now, and it's sort of balanced itself out. But I don't think we embrace the foreign players enough. I don't. I think we still, in fact, I don't understand why it's still them and us. That still seems to be a thing. And it feeds itself out into the media generally. And I think, we talk about it as fans a lot because we see it. And they will deny it in the mainstream and say, oh no, that's not going on. But we see the bias every bloody week, every single day. So actually, I was quite pleased that Carragher tweeted about it last night, because I think it's something we as fans have been talking about for ages. It's constant. You watched the game last night, and the way that first goal gets analysed, De Gea passes it to Maguire, and everybody's talking about De Gea shouldn't have played the pass. But De Gea's been doing that all season. And if that goes to Martinez or Varane, they deal with it. It goes to somebody who can't deal with it, but he's got a British passport. So let's take it back to the goalkeeper, because he hasn't. And there's a proper conversation to be had about, proportion of the blame. But ultimately, Maguire should deal with that better. But no, let's not talk about that as much. Let's talk about this, because he's an easier target. And it goes on. It goes on. And I don't think it's right. Anyway, get your comments in below. I'm sure you'll have lots of comments about this. I can only come at it really from a Man United angle, although I do agree with what I said about Salah. What do you think about it? What are your thoughts for your club and this situation? Is this something that needs addressing by the mainstream, that we very clearly see it as fans, that British players get overhyped and protected and the foreign players seem to get it in the neck all the time and are underappreciated? Is it a thing? Get your comments in below. Don't forget to smash a like on the video and please do subscribe. Bottom right hand corner. We're getting closer and closer to that million. Hopefully we can hit it this year. Make sure you subscribe. Bottom right hand corner. Speak to you in a bit.